Be advised that this show is not for the faint of heart, easily offended, or children of any age. The opinions and information expressed in this podcast are intended for entertainment purposes only. Deviant Robot provides no guarantee as to the accuracy, completeness, currentness, or validity of this content. Like many things in life, don't take it too seriously and stop using if irritation develops.
Hello everybody, my name is William Owen. I'm your host for Inspire Reflection Live, and today, as always, we are joined, well, not as always, this is a very, we have a rolling cast here. This is a very intemporal thing, but for today we have, yes, I got the right way around, Joe over there. Hello, Joe.
Hello.
And the ever charming Reed from Cordial Curiosity. Hey, Reed.
Hey. Glad to be here.
Hello, everybody. It is really hot today. It's the temperature is creeping back up towards the 30s again, which I'm not enjoying.
I was about to say, let me hear what's hot for an Englishman. What do you got? What do you got? Well, what is it, 24 today? Or?
To be fair, yeah, like my bar is very low for that. But it's a hot day the moment it gets over 22. 22 becomes a hot day for me. Cool. Well, I hope everybody's well in chat. I hope you all have that fantastic and fabulous Friday feeling. Today so this is going to be a bit different because we've been doing sort of a multitude of topics in the last few streams, and that's fun. And I think that's really working, and that's definitely going to be our main sort of structure for the show moving forward. But today, I think I wanted to just pick up on just the one topic because I think it's quite a big topic that comes at the end that we started with sort of 10 minutes to go at the end of our last episode, which was ridiculous. And that keeps happening, which is I keep putting the really interesting, big, meaty topic right at the end. And then, of course, we don't get time to really give it the airtime that it deserves. So the topic for today, well, the thing I'd like to discuss is the hard versus soft SE question. And what are those things? What do I mean by that? How do we relate to them as ideas? Is one better than the other? And et cetera, and talk about, I guess, the SE community's general relationship to those ideas. But before, I guess, we do that, a couple of things to announce. One, I've just been told that GG and Diamond Discourse will be out in in doing public SE in the park in Alexandria, Virginia on July 10th. I don't know if there's a better... How big is this park in Alexandria, Virginia? Because is there just one park and is it super tiny? Are people going to be able to sort of get to the park and find you? Or you're going to have to fill us in on how we find you in the park, Gigi. So yeah, if you guys are available for that, I guess hit them up on Discord and they'll help you find where they are. So that's Gigi and Diamond doing SE public practice in the park in Alexandria, Virginia on July 10th. And another little bit of news is we were just talking about just before we went live, but Reed, you were saying that the first ever is this a meeting for creators or for practitioners, or what was the meeting that went on?
Yeah, we're calling this the Practitioner Committee. Mark Solomon of Being Reasonable is the chair of that committee. And we had our first meeting with a bunch of people, up to like 10 people, I think, showed up. And we just talked about the problems people might face when trying to create content for SE. And it was a great meeting.
Awesome. And is this specifically for people wanting to produce content, or is it just for general practicing?
For people specifically who want to produce content.
Awesome. Awesome. What were some of the challenges? Was there a commonality to the challenges that people were expressing?
Some people were just afraid of going out in public, being shy. Some were worried about financial stuff. Some were worried about equipment stuff. There's a range of problems.
Yeah, the technology side. Just one of those things. If you're feeling a bit nervous about it, hip flask. That's what I'm going to say. Hip flask. Just don't do that. That's not a good solution.
So will that meeting be available for others to watch, or as a resource?
Oh yeah, great question.
Was it a closed meeting?
Actually, no. These are all going to be private Zoom conversations.
Okay. Yeah. Got it.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, that's cool. I can understand. I think it's good because I think there is. I mean, we did an episode of this with yourself, Reed, and Anthony. We talked about the technology side of things, and I think the tech challenges are not insignificant. But I definitely think like sharing those ideas is a great way to take some of the burden off individuals having to solve the problems that other people have solved already. Yes. So that's really awesome.
Someone from the meeting mentioned that video specifically and appreciated that.
Awesome. Well, that's really cool. Yeah. And I do still intend to do some videos on DaVinci Resolve to try to do like an introduction to that as free software. I think it's great. And and there's like a bunch of other little things that I think would be really useful that people just, if you're not aware of them, you might end up spending a lot of money that you don't need to spend. So yeah, that's really awesome. And so are they going to be like a weekly thing, or a monthly thing, those meetings, or just an ad hoc thing?
I think every 2 weeks or so.
That's cool. Awesome. Yeah, that's a good schedule. Awesome. So yeah, lots of lively things going on in the SE community. So do check those out if you're a content creator. Yeah. How do people get onto the content creation list? I guess that's kind of a trickier thing. I think you can email one of the Discord admins and let them know that you're a content creator and send them a link to your channel. Is that the official way of doing that?
Yeah, at this point, just find Mark on Discord and DM him, and he'll work with the mods to give you a role to the Creators Lounge channel, and that's where we'll be talking.
We'll include his personal phone number and home address in the description below. So, no, that's cool, awesome. Yeah, so Mark Solomon or one of the Discord mods, hit those guys up, let them know, and they'll help you out. Fantastic. Okay, cool. So yeah, let's talk about this hard versus soft SE, and I think like before. This was a topic that was introduced towards the end of the last stream, and it kind of got rolled into some things that David from Sound Epistemology had sort of done to try to go back to the university where Peter Boghossian had been, and in his words, sort of build some bridges again, or sort of mend some reputational damage that maybe SE had suffered. And it also related to a comment that was posted in response to our review of Peter Boghossian's, attempts to go out there and do sort of SE or SE-like stuff. And the comment was an interesting one because it sort of was a critique of our commentary against Peter Boghossian, suggesting that we were being too softly about everything, and everything was all nice and friendly. And sometimes, it maybe really was putting off a lot of people that really wanted to take a more active, let's say, approach in engaging with people and their ideas. And so this is why this kind of idea of hard versus soft SE sort of has come from. And so I didn't define it very well at the beginning. I tried to later, but as a working definition, I think there's something like hard SE is what I'm sort of referring to. There is SE that is designed to deliver like a much more pointed message, be maybe a little bit more aggressive in tone or a little bit more agendaed in your approach. And another thing that's interesting is perhaps that the hard SE approach might be more effective in reaching people that aren't the interlocutor. So this might be a conversation you might have in public, and the impact of the conversation is maybe more for the audience than it is for the person you're speaking to. And those would be some of the characteristics I might describe as sort of hard SE. And soft SE would be sort of the opposite of that. So I guess soft SE would be the total focus on the individual. The idea is that you really don't want to bring an agenda. You want to try and remove as much bias as possible. And that you want to try to maintain rapport at all costs. And that's seen as, I guess, the softer approach to SE. So before we continue, do those seem like the right kind of characteristics? Does that description seem to make sense?
Yep.
How about you, Joe?
Yeah, I can see the difference. It's sort of a newer concept to me, but I can see a clear distinction between those two. So it makes sense to me.
So I just want to make it really clear that I just invented this hard soft SE thing in my head. So it's not like an officially understood terminology, but I guess it's just describing these two sort of versions of things. And I think one thing that's kind of occurs to me is that it feels like we used to be more interested in hard SE, and we've now sort of transitioned away from hard SE to a more softer SE. That SE is softened as it's gotten older. It's gotten less openly agendaed. It's gotten a little bit more caring about rapport building, and et cetera, et cetera. So my assertion here, based on purely just my subjective reading of A Manual for Creating Atheists and noticing the difference between older SE videos and newer SE videos, has been that SE is softened as it's aged. And does that reflection ring true for you guys?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a noticeable journey in more of the key personalities like Anthony Magnabosco, of course. I mean, his earlier stuff was, well, as he describes himself, the sort of angry atheist phase, which morphed, and then his full transition into SE and his progression through a much softer rapport building style. So you can certainly see it there. But I don't think you sort of went with the more rapport side of things immediately with your content, right, Reed, from my perspective? Or
What do you mean?
Well, I feel like your SE that you started doing with Cordial Curiosity was sort of starting on that softer side, where it wasn't leading or aggressive so much, but you would attempt to build rapport and use active listening and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think that was very much part of it from the get-go, the rapport and listening. It's just the matter of what you're there for. What is your highest priority to go out there for? And when I started, I was definitely wanting to use SE to persuade Christians in a single conversation to drastically drop their confidence in, or just religious people, to drop their confidence in their supernatural beliefs. And I found out that's not really something wise to expect in a single conversation. But I did get people thinking about their beliefs and maybe doubting a little bit. But, I don't think that should be your main goal, though. But that could be a secondary goal, persuasion, potentially. But that should never be your top priority, because it comes off as insincere, and it doesn't help you really. If the process is fair and sincere, and it just happens to go the way you would like it to go, then that's just a bonus.
Yeah, this would be my feeling here, and I, I'm just throwing it out there. Like, I think that SE has learned not that the softly approach is just nicer because it just is. I think it's learned that the softer approach is more effective in delivering its objective. But one thing is where it's more effective. I think the softer SE approach is more effective with your interlocutor. It's more effective with the person you're talking to. And it's not particularly fun to watch for an audience. It's not necessarily going to connect in the same way. You're wanting to make a very specific connection with the person in front of you. And you want to use their language and their terms, and you're going to move at their pace. And that's not going to be the same as the audience's pace or the audience's general understanding of terms and ideas. And so softer SE, I think, has been increasing its efficacy, as in it's increasingly working at encouraging people to reflect, but it's been doing so with much more focus on the individual, whereas the harder SE may be actually not as effective at getting that individual to reflect. But I think that it's very cathartic, firstly, for the person doing it. Like, it feels like it's more honest, expressing rage and frustration at the person's silly ideas, exasperation, those kinds of things. And I think it feels more cathartic, and I think that it has a shock value that gives it the appearance of being effective. And I think as a result, I think what's happened is, as it's gotten older and it's softened, people are starting to miss the kind of easier. Is it easier? I don't know. Which is easier? I was about to say that hard SE is easier, and I suspect it is because it's easier just to give into your just emotional impulses as the street epistemologist, right? And just say, the Earth's just round. You're crazy. You have no models. Where's your basis? You've got nothing. Just to resort to this sort of uncharitable way of dialogue that might be easier to go for.
As far as I'm concerned, it's indistinguishable, hard SE from soft SE, the way you're describing it. It's all about the internal state of whoever the SE practitioner is and their intentions, and that can be invisible.
Right. I think if it's visible, I think it would be. So I'm talking about the fact that, if somebody's in front of me and is, saying something, as here's a great one that just makes me just sort of mentally roll my eyes. Is when people might make the claim of about subjective truth, right? You have your truth, I have my truth, man. We can just have our truths, and it kind of just mentally makes me eye roll. And I know that what they're really communicating there isn't really that they actually believe that. What they're communicating there is that they don't necessarily want to have an argument about it, and they just want to be friends, but not have to have this out. Or they may really believe it, but I find that very frustrating to hear. And so it might be more cathartic for me to say, come on, you can't really believe that, can you? But that wouldn't be a very good SE way of framing the question. I don't think, come on, you can't really believe that, can you? That's a very leading question. And I think we would try to avoid questions like that, or ways of framing it, because clearly they've said that they do, and you just asserting that they're lying in this moment is going to create a barrier between you and that person, right? So what you need to do in the soft SE would be to try to find a way of helping them notice that way of thinking about the world isn't actually how they really actually do see the world, and point to examples where you would allow them to make that, notice that, and then reflect on it, and then that would be really useful. But I would say that latter approach is the softer SE, and just come on, you can't really believe that, is a harder SE approach. And I think it takes more effort to do the soft version. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. Do we have examples of that harder version happening often, or do people usually keep it as soft anyway?
So I think what Peter Boghossian was doing was definitely, if it was SE at all, was certainly the harder side of SE. Like, I think he was being very direct. He was messaging. He clearly had a view of what he wanted to do. If that was SE, then it certainly was harder SE. And I think another example that comes up quite often is Doug, Pine Creek, and his approach to engaging in conversation. And I think with Doug, I don't think Doug claims that what he's doing is SE, but I think some people see it as like the more honest version of what SE is trying to do. And I think that there's certainly those were two examples that were pointed to in the comment that was raised in our commentary video. And I think it's interesting. I definitely get the impulse that people want to see a sort of, they want to see the combat, they want to see the debate, they want to see, they urge for it, and I get it. I do. I enjoyed that stuff. I love watching Christopher Hitchens. Like his debates with theists going around America was just a joy to watch. It was super good fun, but I don't think he was a good street epistemologist.
Do we still call it street epistemology though when someone's being combative? I mean, they can be using techniques that someone might use in conducting street epistemology, but that's where I'm curious about this hard and soft definition. Like once you get to the hard point, are you no longer doing SE anymore, or yeah, I'm not sure.
This is a great question. Yeah, I mean, this is why I don't think what Peter Boghossian was doing wasn't what I saw as SE. And I do get the impulse that some people in the community might feel like that was SE. It was doing the work of challenging what people thought, and especially on an important issue which did need challenging. And I think the problem was that the approach. How could we say that what he was doing wasn't SE, for example? Like where would we stand to say that what Peter Boghossian was doing in his videos wasn't SE?
In Module 1, we have civil, sincere, and collaborative way of applying a set of philosophy and psychology-based conversational tools to primarily reflect on the quality of reason someone has. So was he sincere, civil, and collaborative, say, in like the Abolish the CSUPD video? That was like one of his earlier attempts. Whether the America is Racist was the first time he attempted to do that spectrum type of thing. Maybe that one was better. And that one was, you could tell by his tone and his preamble, that was all revealing his perspective, his position. And then when he found someone, his tone was still not collaborative. It was a little more inquisitorial. So that would be a disqualification.
The other thing that I think that's important is that the context that he was maintaining was context with, I think, the audience, not with the individuals he was speaking to, right? So if there was a preamble that explained his motives, it was being given to, I'd imagine, the audience more than the film crew, posterity, rather than the person, the individuals. And so to me, the locus, I got this wrong the other day, somebody cussed it. I always say locust, and it's locus, but anyway, the locus of the conversation is for him is with the audience, whereas I think in proper SE the locus should be with the person you're speaking to, but I'm asserting that, and there's nothing really in the rules, as it were, to say that that's not the case.
Yeah, it becomes a little blurred when you have cameras and stuff and you're keeping in mind the audience. I think he was sincere and civil in that, but I think he could be more collaborative. And is there a word that we're missing, like neutral, or does he need to be more not revealing of his opinion?
Well, I mean, he literally defined the delivering of messages stuff in How to Having Possible Conversations, and I think that he definitely was delivering messages throughout his dialogue, and that became something after How to Have Impossible Conversations. The idea of not delivering messages became something that was adopted by the SE community as a great principle. But again, there's nothing that says if you do deliver messages, you're not doing SE anymore. Like this is one of the real challenges of SE, is that it seems to lack a strong enough definition such that it's really hard to say whether could we say that what Peter was doing wasn't SE? Like, I don't know that we could. It isn't to me. Like, I can say to me that's not what I would want SE to mean, but I can't say that it isn't SE.
Yeah, like it's not prioritizing rapport enough. Like I think they were in the America's Racist one feeling a bit pressured. It was too fast. It was too, you could tell there's too much energy in the conversation. It needed to be more chill. And but Diamond says Peter's most recent video on abortion is much closer to soft SE, and I would agree with that.
Right. Yeah, that's cool. And again, this isn't a criticism of Peter. Like, if he achieved what he achieved when he was going out there, and he's happy with that content, or he's on a journey and he's evolving his understanding of how he wants to do this. This is great. Like this is another part of this conversation that I'd like to get into. Is like, is there a good reason why we moved from, let's say we've moved from a harder SE to a softer SE? Is there a reason why SE is softened? Is it more effective? And how do we know that? How have we determined that it's more effective?
I don't know.
Because one of the things I think you might find from people like Pine Creek is, they might say, and not just Pine Creek. I apologize to Pine Creek, by the way, because he's a great go-to example of this. But they might say, well, look, it's much, maybe I'm not going to convince that person, but maybe I'll convince 20 people that are listening, or 50 people, or 100 people that are listening. This is the kind of a strategy that the debate comes at, and this is usually, and this is kind of interesting because it relates to this talk that Anthony gave at the American Atheist Conference, where he was talking about an interaction that he had prior to his adoption of SE. And I've got the video queued up, so if you don't mind, take a quick look at this, and I think it might frame a little bit of what we're trying to talk about here.
Have better conversations with the believers who are making these claims. Okay. I brought along, did I kick out? Bruce, can you?
Sorry, I didn't cue this up very brilliantly.
Maximize that? Okay. That may have
I
been
know
my
if
fault.
I skip ahead, I'm either going to destroy
so I brought
the
along
video.
a couple of video clips here, so just a little warning. The first video clip I want to show you, this is about 2 minutes long. I've got 5 video clips total. But I want to kind of show you how I used to go out and have talks with believers. This is a street preacher here in front of the Alamo, and this was back in 2012. This is about 2 minutes long. He does talk about hell during this video. So fair warning, if that troubles you, you might want to be aware of that. There are some people that are really troubled by it, and that's fine. So just fair warning. And this is not an example of street epistemology. Don't watch this video, walk out, and think, oh, that's what street epistemology is. And the other takeaway I wanted to let you know is that I'm not really proud of this exchange. So here we go.
He's really charming in this whole video, by the way. He's on point. This is like premium Anthony. But he set this up really well, right? He's trying to explain how don't think this is SE. This isn't what we should be doing, etc.
Preacher Phil. Volume.
God and do it.
You said that already.
We have the Word of God. It's in the King James Bible. It's not the Book of Mormon. It's not the Kabbalah. It's not the Babylonian Talmud.
There's
it's
just
in
as,
the Word of God, the King James Bible.
There's just as much evidence for those gods than there is your God.
Not really.
Yes, there is.
Not really.
There's zero evidence.
The Scripture says Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners.
That's what it says, but why should we believe
it? Today?
Why should we believe that?
Are you saved? Not are you a Mormon or a Baptist or a Catholic or a Methodist, but are you saved? The Bible says we must be saved. Jesus saved me in 1987 in the month of December, and I'm not going back to what I was. I'm no better than anybody else, but my friends, as a street preacher, I gotta warn you, there is a hell, and you're going there,
There's-
you will not repent.
There's
and
absolutely
receive
no,
the Lord Jesus
there's
Christ
absolutely no evidence
as your
for a
Savior
hell or a
and Lord.
heaven or a purgatory. There's no evidence for that at all.
You'll find out. There'll be plenty of evidence.
How could you believe in something now without even knowing that it's
Because
true?
the guy in the book of
You
Luke,
point to-
chapter 16
you point to the
tells-
Bible
tells about
again.
He went to hell.
There's no
You don't
evidence that the
believe it.
Bible's true.
You don't believe it, dude.
Of course I don't. I'm not convinced that it is true.
Well, that's all right.
You're
I'm
making
not condemning you because you don't, man.
you're making the claim. You need to prove to me that it's
I
true.
don't have to prove to you anything.
Yes, you do.
No,
You
I
can't stand
don't.
out here and make claims
Heck, I can.
as if it's a fact
Right here, man.
and
That's my
scare
fact.
these people and young kids.
Hey, listen.
What's
to
wrong
me.
with you?
I was kind of hoping that would not draw an applause line.
So I get it. I believe him that like he wasn't playing that for the celebration of it, right? He was playing that as an example of like, this is how badly it went. Like, this was not productive. And yet it was funny. It was entertaining. And in a moment he goes on to talk about how, like, you know, every which way that was a failed conversation, but in reality he said that, you know, that maybe he didn't reach that person, but there were people around him, the couple sitting on the table and the young kid that was sat behind the preacher, and he talks about maybe at least that those people saw somebody challenging this person's views. Like, somebody said that this isn't true and stood up and spoke out about it, so that it wasn't being said unchallenged and people weren't just ignoring it. And so his and again, he wasn't really defending this approach, right? He was very much condemning that approach. But it was interesting to me that he goes on to use the fact that maybe with the preacher it didn't have an effect, but maybe with the people around him it did. And that seems like the general justification, I guess, for the kind of more aggressive approach. That maybe it doesn't help that one person, but maybe it's a useful demonstration. So yeah, I don't know. How do we measure that? How do we find out if that's effective or not? Have we made a mistake by becoming nice and charming and polite and friendly and building rapport and giving such primacy to rapport? Maybe we should be going out there and, you know, just screaming at some guy and saying you're wrong.
I think there's a lot of factors that go into that. I think one of the huge parts of that is who your interlocutor is. I mean, you can just as easily go and see one of his examples of charming soft essay, and when he's speaking to these people respectfully and actively listening and being as charming as he always is, and then they are open to reflecting, the result is absolutely magic, right? Whereas a street preacher, like walking up to that guy mid-sermon, I mean, you're not going to say, oh, you know, do you have a couple of minutes to the standard soft essay. So it's circumstantial in large degree. Yeah, in terms of efficacy, I mean, as you say, is it more for the audience or more for the individual you're speaking to is another factor. Yeah, I think there's a million different factors there, but I think in general, I'm more behind the soft essay. Well, the essay movement, I think that's why I'm here, because I do believe it has a larger ability to allow for somebody to reflect on their views than other methods that I've seen. So, yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Reed?
Yeah, we want to be able to model a way of having conversations that's not recorded. And we don't want to model something that only works when it's recorded. So anybody can watch an essay video nowadays, usually, and completely just copy that and talk with someone, friends, family, coworkers, and they'll have a great conversation. And there won't be recording at all. That won't even be a factor. So that's the kind of stuff we want to push for. It's a way of modeling conversation anyone can have anywhere at any time.
What
Yeah.
if it could be demonstrated that you know you reach more people through this kind of shock, you know, an awe approach, and you know, maybe you don't reach the person you're speaking to, but maybe the wider effect is better. Would we still want to apply the softly approach, the sort of softer SE approach?
Depends on your goals.
Right. Yeah. That's so if the goal is to have more people believe things for rational reasons, if humiliating somebody and sort of embarrassing them with by pointing out how stupid their reasoning is was more effective at helping those people around you notice that maybe they should think about having better reasons for what they believe, would that be what we should be doing? And if not, why not?
I'm a big fan of like the formula of humanity Mark Manson talks about in his book. I forgot which one, but it's like we don't want to treat people merely as a means. We want to treat them as an ends in themselves. So
Right.
if we treat people as a means to persuade other people watching, that violates that principle of humanity, and that's not the most ethical thing to do. If you could do it, like that's a consequentialist method, and this is more a deontological rule to follow. Don't treat people as a means. Only treat them as an ends in themselves. So I don't want to use people in that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
And I think there's something to be said for what you mentioned, Reid, in the terms of how this then bleeds into everyday life. That people who use this can have better conversations with colleagues or family members and all the rest of it. But I see that utility too. But the real hope I see, I asked you about this once. I asked you and Dali, I think, early on when I was in the community. I asked about, do you think there's a way to come back from the brink in terms of instead of having two groups of people on either side of the void just screaming at each other, is there a way we can restore an ability for those people to have conversations? And I think this method can really restore that fractured ability for conversation at the moment, because, however detestable the thing is that I feel the person is talking about, if I apply this method, then we should be able to have a conversation that is cordial and allows them to speak their mind, and in a way that they're not just reacting in that knee-jerk way of the combative sense that they would, in the usual talking head sort of situations. So yeah, I think it's a broader utility in lots of different areas. And I think the more people that know about this and use this, the better society would become at large. I really believe that.
I think there's a concern I would have is that I think it's certainly possible that you could maybe in the moment persuade those people standing around you in the crowd that you're right on the particular point that you're raising. I think maybe you could persuade people by just being, applying persuasion and rhetoric, and you could win the crowd over, and you could cause the person you're speaking to be embarrassed and all that good stuff, and that's possible. But I suspect that if the crowd is so easily persuaded by charisma and rhetoric, then they're going to be just as easily persuaded the other way. Like those people, I think, are just being buffeted around by the winds of charisma, or the charisma of others. And I think the thing that's important about SE is that it encourages the individuals to build better resilience to those kinds of things, to do their own thinking, and actually to challenge them to, build their foundations and be confident in them. And I think that's a much better long-term strategy. And I think what we lose in the ability to be deployed en masse, to have a wide area of effect, what we lose in that, we gain in, I think, being able to instill much more long-term strategies in the person that we're talking to, much more long-term and meaningful changes in the person that we're talking to. And I think that means that person's not likely to be the same after a good SE conversation. That person's always going to keep thinking back to that. If it's a really good SE conversation, that's just going to be a set of thinking tools that person's going to value for the rest of their life. If it's a really good SE conversation, that can happen. Whereas, charisma can buffet you one way or buffet you the other way. Who knows? Yeah, that's not really going to stand you in good stead for a long term, I don't think. Cool. Awesome. I think, yeah, I think it's interesting because one of the questions that this raises, of course, is how do you measure the efficacy of SE? And I know that this is a real challenge because one of the things that would be great is if there was a way to measure SE. Because then we could discover whether or not something was more or less effective. Some of the tools inside there were more or less effective, and you could do more long-term studies on the approach and the methods. I think it's a real challenge. Has anybody come up? I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on this or like any work's been done in this way.
I just finished reading How Minds Change by David McCraney, and there's tons of great models and stuff to think about in there. I particularly like the elaboration likelihood model, which kind of is about how it says all communications between humans could be broken down to who says what to whom, in which channel, and with what effect. There's so many different variables there that factor in to people's how they change their minds in which way. So all of that is very dependent on the context and who you're saying is what. All of that works together in a particular way, and you have to be able to take that into account when you're doing studies about communication.
Who thinks what and in what way?
Yeah, who says what to whom, in which channel, and with what effect.
What do we mean by channels there?
The channel is the medium of the context, either through like video chat or in person or on text or in a classroom.
I was just laughing briefly at the fact that Joe has interjected by raising his own comment into the conversation. But that is pretty much exactly what you just said.
Yep.
No, I copied the text that Reed provided, and so people can read it along with it.
There you go.
Make it easier to digest. Called being good at producing the show. Well, come on, give me a break.
Good. I see. I'm just so bad at it. I can't even recognize it when it's done well. I think so. So how does that help us measure then something like whether or not SE has been effective? Would we need to measure the communications to find out if they were going to mention the ideas, or how does this help us potentially measure the efficacy of SE?
Yeah, we were wondering in that last part with what effect. Does it affect people to change minds? Well, SE can be used in very different ways. Who says what to whom and which channel? So it could be one-on-one. It could be one with a few people privately, or it could be one with a few one-on-one recorded and they know they're being watched. So that's another context. So all of these need to be tried out and see what has the most effect. And if we want that effect, then we need to probably stick to what has the most effect.
Yeah. So what would you say your goal is with SE? Why do you have the conversations that you have with people?
When I'm one-on-one individually, it's to help them merely reflect on their views and hopefully have a better model of how to check the quality of their reasons for whatever they're talking about, so that they can use that in their own life, and just also recording that so other people can copy it, and then that will hopefully raise the sanity waterline in society.
And how often do you have SE conversations that aren't recorded? Just out of curiosity. Sorry, Joe, I was going to throw over to you in a sec, but I just thought this question was
Virtually never.
Interesting. It was in the end of Anthony's videos. I asked him if he could SE anybody, who would he SE, and I think he chose Trump or Jordan Peterson, I think, and we talked about that. But his view was like, it would have to be recorded. Like he wouldn't want to do it not recorded. For him, SE is very much tied to this idea of sharing the idea of SE. That's why I should imagine that at some point that becomes kind of why he's doing SE, is not really so much about the individual mind changing, but more just the movement of SE itself growing, which is a perfectly valid shift, I think, in mindset. But it's an interesting one to notice. Joe, why do you think you want to get out there and do SE, and why have you done SE in the past?
Yeah, just what I touched on before in terms of I really do have a fairly healthy concern about our inability to communicate on two sides of a difficult topic, right? And there's sort of this underlying aversion to disagreement as well I find in conversation with people just in general. And yeah, I think if our ability to communicate honestly and with each other, and to reflect on our views and reflect on the views of others and have those views compared, and honestly talk back and forth and have a dialogue about those things, I just think that's one of the most key components to an informed, healthy democracy. And yeah, not only that, but just better relationships between humans and more time for kindness. And yeah, it really centered around that. And also I would like it people believe things for good reasons. I mean, you can believe true things for bad reasons too, and I think that's equally as bad as the rest. And again, in a thing where we're voting for people, and where the mass of us are making these decisions on the directions our country's going, then if we believed true things for good reasons, I feel like we would have a better society than if not. But yeah, and I think SE helps us get there. So
there are very few countries in the world right now where you could say that you don't need to be concerned about the direction your country's going. I can't think of one offhand. It's kind of concerning, and that's largely because we're concerned that people who we disagree with might be having a huge influence in the way our society's rolling, right? And that means, that level of concern in the world is very alarming. And I think, having a way of having the conversation with somebody that doesn't result in just you're wrong and like you don't know what you're talking about, those kinds of closed statements, those kinds of assertions, having a way of just making sure that you've frankly recalibrated your expectation about what's achievable in a given conversation is a huge fucking step. I mean, you mentioned earlier, like, not having the expectation that you're going to convert somebody from Christianity in a single conversation means that you're now able to have a more productive conversation, right? Because you haven't got that unfortunate goal that's going to be hugely unattainable. And I'd be suspicious if you did succeed. Right? Yeah. Anybody that easy to be persuaded again, you'd worry about it. It's interesting. One of the things I think is quite fun for me about SE is that I like talking to other human beings. Like there's a kind of a genuine pleasure for me in talking to people and hearing how their world is different from mine. I think that's really interesting, and that's not really an SE thing. That's just a kind of a me thing. But one thing that I've reflected on a few times is when I was in Japan. There's a huge supermarket chain in Japan called Life. So the store is just a huge grocery store, and it's very fancy and nice and fancy. And in Japan, fancy things are usually written in English to make them mildly incomprehensible, presumably, because nothing says fancy like being unable to read it. And so, like, in the UK we have, like, fancy stores will say things in French because we don't speak French and therefore it seems more fancy, but in Japan they use English. So this huge department store was called Life, and I was standing in front of a huge, beautifully stocked chiller cabinet in this supermarket, staring at this sign in the middle of Japan that said, "Thank you for coming to Life." And I thought, wow, that's quite an embracing message, right? That's quite a thing to say, right? And I know what it meant, but also I was kind of I initially started to laugh at it, and then I started laughing at myself for finding it mildly poignant. That nobody had ever really said thank you to me for coming to Life. Nobody had ever. It just sort of felt like in this brief moment, this entire supermarket had just sort of noticed me as a human being. And I think there's something not dissimilar to that in SE. Nobody really ever talks to us, not very often, we don't ever get talked to, about things that are important to us, that without this agenda, without this idea that really the conversation's not really about what I think, it's about what the person talking to me thinks. And they're just trying to get me to see the world from their view, right? Even maybe they're making it seem like it's about me, but really it's about them. And I kind of think that the more SE is about them, the more we let go of our own identities and views and biases in the conversation, and the more we can have a conversation with this other person and give them the space to actually think things through in a way that we never take the time. I don't take the time to think things through, and I think about things all the time. And there's tons of things that I do in my world where I don't really just take a moment and just wonder, why do I think that? Why am I doing that? Why do I feel that? To give somebody that time to think about it and help them, ask them questions that helps them reflect on it, I think it's fucking awesome. I think it's really important. And it's about as far away from hard SE as you can get, I think. But that's the kind of thing that I really value in SE, I think. The idea that you're just giving that person that moment.
I agree.
Yeah. Cool. How about chat? Anybody got any interesting views on SE that are different to the ones we've discussed?
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of fun conversations going on. I'm really terrible at reading chat, by the way. I hope are you giving it some
Gigi was...
looking?
Yeah.
My main concern is the person I'm talking to and not really what's entertaining for the crowd. Yeah, that's a huge difference, I think. Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. To me, it's about making that personal connection. So sort of the hard SE approach, Peter Boghossian isn't doing that when he's talking to the people he's talking to. I mean, none of the interactions he was having was really about trying to connect to the people he was talking to in a genuine, empathetic way. I think he was trying to create content. And there's nothing wrong with creating content, to be clear. Like there's plenty of documentary filmmakers that made careers out of that. But I don't feel like he was really trying to talk to the individuals. He was trying to create something for the audience. And I think that's why I don't think it was SE. The locus of the conversation was the audience. Even if hard SE is more persuasive to an audience, those skills would be less effective in real life, unrecorded conversations. I agree. Yeah. Yeah, completely agree. So I guess the reason why I wanted to talk about this is that I feel like there's a slight pullback to wanting to go back to hard SE. The softer SE appears to get. I think certain people are going to see it as getting weaker. I think people are going to see it as too softly, and I think part of the problem is we're not really carrying the sense of why soft SE is more effective. By the way. I really like this analogy is good one. Thank you, Stephen. That made me chuckle. It's like Jedi versus Sith. I like this dark side SE versus light side SE. That's a much better.
I have thought about that analogy myself before. Yeah.
Is it just because Peter Boghossian has an Emperor Palpatine kind of vibe to him? And who is Luke Skywalker in this narrative? That's excuse me. But yeah, maybe one thing we're not doing is we're not helping people understand why soft SE is actually better. But maybe one of the reasons we don't do that is maybe we're not sure ourselves why it's better.
I think there's also the problem of the audience. If someone's just clicking through YouTube hooked on outrage bait and shock content and all the rest of it, then if somebody's branching that way into SE, they'll find that and they'll consume that, and that's great. But it's not going to further SE in their minds or SE writ large. So I think I'm not sure I see a pull in general of SE content now moving back towards that way at all. Myself in the SE content that I'm consuming right now, I'm thinking about Mark Solomon and Diamond and all these wonderful new content creators that are just doing an absolutely brilliant job of having genuinely caring, listening conversations with their conversation partners.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm not sure whether I see any pull back towards that way, but I think again, the audience finds its way to the content. So the people that find their way to Diamond and Mark's content will see what's happening there. They'll see how genuine those guys are being and how effective it's being in helping the person they're speaking to reflect and all the rest of it. I think the proof is in the pudding, so to speak.
Can they see how effective it's being? Because that's part of the problem, I think, with the soft SE is that I think it's a much less performance art. Like, don't, and this is not a criticism.
Yeah.
I think there are some fucking amazing SE videos out there, right? And I've even seen 1 or 2 on Reed's channel. He's done all right. I mean, okay, they're all right. No, they're not too bad. But there's clearly a lot of really awesome SE videos out there, and I know that and like I think it might have even been Mark Solomon that said this. Like you kind of need to know what you're looking for when you're watching an SE video, right? Because if you're expecting the kind of atheist slam dunk destroys Christian move, which YouTube is going to encourage a lot of people to look for, it's going to be like, it's going to be like if you're used to drinking tea with sugar in it and you suddenly drink a cup of tea without the sugar in it, it's going to taste absolutely disgusting. You're going to be looking for that sugar, and that sugar ain't there. So, but if you get used to it, then all of a sudden you can start to appreciate the flavor of the tea without the sugar in it. And I think SE is like the tea without the sugar in it. So yeah, I'm concerned that the optic isn't there, but also part of that's because you can't see whether it's effective or not.
Well, also again, I truly believe it depends on what the audience is looking for. If they're looking for a way to have better conversations in their life and to help loved ones or others reflect, I mean, they're going to see that. They're going to see that. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't have ever seen that magic. You'd watch the Maritza video from Anthony Magnabosco and think nothing's happening there. I mean, I don't know. I don't think you'd be sitting and having this conversation right now if you didn't find the magic in those videos. So I'm not sure how you know what I mean? It's there.
It's a perfectly valid point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not saying it's not there. I'm just saying I think it's less easy to see. Like you like, it's very difficult to take the highlights of an SE conversation, for example, like a good SE conversation, and take that one sliver and then put it out there without it looking ungenerous. Like that's a problem I've had when I've looked through some of the video content I've been putting together. If you take any piece of the SE conversation out of it and put it in isolation, it feels either you're being really ungenerous to SE, really ungenerous to your interlocutor, or really ungenerous to just the general narrative of what was happening. Like you kind of have to see the journey unfold, and it takes time. And people in, I guess, this sort of modern TikTok generation, they're not used to seeing conversations unfold. They want the slam dunk moment. And so that's maybe part of the problem. But then the other thing, of course, is they want to see their side win, which is not really the game that we're playing here.
Yeah, I mean, you're essentially talking about a marketing issue at that point rather than the efficacy of the project.
Agreed.
And
yes.
And to me, I mean, the pendulum swings in so much of everything. I mean, a terrible analogy that I'll run with anyway is like when craft beer started out and everything had to be the highest IBU count possible. Discovered you could make beer more bitter, and then it was like having more IBUs on the label. That lasted about 6 months before everyone realized they don't want to drink the most bitter beer in the world every time they drink a beer, right? And the same with all this shock content. I mean, the groundswell of Anthony's channel from what it was and the amount of followers it has now is proof in that. And I think people, the vocal people are the ones hooked on the outrage bait and are Reddit warriors and are in the comment section making a lot of noise. But I think more and more people will gravitate to that calm conversation. The shock jock thing just, I don't know. You're talking. I would hate to change the project or be concerned about the project's direction based on its marketability on YouTube or something like that. I would. Yeah.
I'm certainly not proposing that. 100% not proposing that. Yeah.
So I'm thinking, if just starting tomorrow, everyone who created SE content did your soft version of SE perfectly when talking with people one-on-one, I would assume they would also still find people who doubted, who changed their confidence, maybe even significantly about their beliefs, potentially, and they have that recorded and they upload that. That is a way to show how some, SE could be a way of persuading, potentially, even though it is pure soft SE. And potentially, they could show how people who have a certain belief use certain justifications in a pattern, and this ideology causes them to have certain character traits and use certain flawed epistemologies, And that could expose an ideology as being a certain way. If you have a bunch of conversations with a bunch of people and that pattern just reveals itself, even if you're doing soft SE perfectly, what would happen then?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be. I totally think this is one of the reasons why this issue gets a little bit muddied, because I think in my recent conversation with Emma, she was talking about how she used to go out and do vegan activism, and she's now starting to really value SE. And then she said, I don't know that SE's really, because she was an activist for veganism. She was promoting and pushing veganism ideas, and then she said you can't really use SE to push veganism. And I said, well, that depends. Do you think there are rational reasons why somebody would be better off if they were a vegan? Like, is veganism a rational position? Because if it is, it should just be as achievable as anything else that's rational under SE. I mean, SE is biased, but it's biased in favor of just holding views for rational reasons. I mean, that's the underlying bias, right? And it doesn't have to be biased in favor or against religion, or in favor or against the flat earth, or in favor or against veganism. It just has to be biased in favor of believing things for good reasons. And so, yeah, I think what you described there, Reed, would make for great content, because I think ultimately you would be bringing back people to you could achieve that just doing soft SE, right?
Yeah. And it almost makes the result more powerful, because you can tell the person doing it did not have an agenda, and it just turned out that way.
Right.
And they were incredibly fair and incredibly sincere and civil and empathetic, and it did result in that change. So it's like even more powerful, really.
But this is a slight danger here in that and I don't disagree with anything you've said, but there's a slight danger in here where we value seeing a change in the person's view, and people can make the mistake of assuming that therefore that's the objective, which it isn't. Like that's an outcome that resulted in our objective being achieved, not the objective itself. And I think that the optics of that are really confused, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, so it's like
I don't care
outcome ambivalent. Is that the key
Yes.
feature?
I think so. Yes. Well, I don't mind where you end up. I just want you to have a better understanding of how you're getting there, and whether you're doing that deliberately or not, whether you're making those choices or whether you just landed somewhere. And if after this conversation where we've talked about how you move around and how you move between one position and another, if we have a conversation about that and you decide actually you don't want to be where you are, that's great. But if you do still, that's great too. And if you're even more confident that you should be where you are, then that's also awesome, right? It's not about whether you change where you end up. It's just about being better able to understand how you got there and make an informed decision about whether that's where you want to be.
Yeah.
So yeah, the changing minds idea is dangerous in a way, because whilst somebody's changing their view is an indicator that they have reflected, right? It's not necessarily, it's too easily conflated with the goal.
I think an easy way to eliminate this is if somebody's believing a true thing for terrible reasons, because you would certainly want to highlight those reasons and remove them, or hope to replace them with more effective ones. So you have achieved the goal, and it will be a really successful conversation, but they will then continue, well, they may or may not continue to believe the true thing, but find better reasons for doing so. So I think that sort of eliminates a little bit what you're talking about there.
That's totally valid. Yeah, that would be 100% valid. Yeah, I want you to have better reasons for being where you are, but it's about those reasons. One of the things that's hugely beneficial about this approach, of course, is it removes the burden of knowing where the person should be from Sorry, I just cropped up. I think that is exactly where I'm at. Yes, you nailed it there, David. I'm a radical soft SEer.
Yeah. And I would say if you do SE that way, you get a gold star, but that doesn't disqualify it from being SE.
Well, yeah. So we could talk about that, but like, so whether this should be what defines SE or not, I'm not sure. But like, what was it? There was a the point about. Oh, that's right. The burden, one of the benefits of removing bias is it removes the burden of you knowing what the other person should think. I mean, I'm very aware that almost all of the ideas I have about the world are really probably quite flawed and wrong in some pretty major ways, right? And it's hard enough for me to make a decision about things in the world, right? And choose how to act. I don't necessarily want to take that burden on for somebody else either, or be responsible for them doing so, right? So I'm fairly convinced that the world is a globe, right? I'm fairly convinced about that, right? And I think that if you believe that the world is flat, I think you're wrong about that. But that doesn't matter to me, right? That's not really what's important to me. What's important to me is that if you've got good and rational reasons for getting you there, then that's great. But I don't want to be, if I tell you, you're wrong about that and you should believe what I believe, I'm now accountable for in some way for you now coming to be persuaded to my view, right? Like I've given you my answer, right, and persuaded you that it's just the correct one. And that means that I hope I'm right, because if that was my objective all along, was to persuade you that it was this way, then what happens if in this situation the roles were reversed and I happen to be a flat earther and I've convinced this other person that the world is flat? You know, that's a dangerous world to be in, right? And it's also a huge responsibility for me now, spreading all the things that I thought were true, only to discover, oh, actually, I'm wrong about this. Now I've got to go. There was somebody in the flat Earth community that was talking about this, and they've kind of given it up and they've walked away from it, and they were reflecting on how many people that they'd convinced of the truth of this position, right? And we see this all the time in politics and in movements where people are going around trying to convince people of the rightness of their side, of their argument, to persuade people to it. And that carries a huge burden of, you better fucking well be right, because now you've run around and told everybody this, and you know, that could be a real problem. But if what you've been doing is running around and saying, hey, have a better reason for whatever it is that you think, well, that's not going to get old, right? That's not going to come back and bite you. Like there's no burden on you being right about that. There's no way that that's a bad move, ever. Like, and that's a hugely useful thing, I think. It's really hot in here, guys.
Yep.
It's coming up to like.
Yeah,
So
I totally agree with that, in the sense that rather than telling by route somebody, okay, this is true. I mean, even just by force saying, no, you're wrong and this way is right. I mean, if they're swayed by that, their epistemology moving forward is not going to be any better to get them towards the truth or anything like that. So yeah, I definitely say that is the utility. You're focusing on changing the quality of reason over the belief itself. I mean, I've said in the past to you, and when we were talking to Mike and stuff, like, to me, as soon as the claim is presented and the SE conversation starts, the claim now becomes immediately irrelevant. I use it as the basis to analyze your reasons, but in my mind, the claim, once presented, is secondary now. It's put to the side, and questions are probed to find the path to arrive at that claim. You know, that's sort of how I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, like, even on the question of the existence of God, right? I personally don't believe there are good reasons to believe in the existence of God. If I did, I would believe in the existence of God. But I don't know that there is no God. And if you happen to have really good reasons for why there is a God, then let me know. I want to hear about that. Like, I want to hear about your good reasons for why I should believe that. That's like, but I think the idea is that we should value having good reasons to believe things doesn't get old. It's not going to break. That's not something you'll regret inspiring in somebody, I think. I'm an advocate for whatever works. I don't think we know which works, hard or soft SE, but I would place my bet on being determined by context. Yeah. So I guess also what do you mean by works? That would be the key thing here.
Yeah, shifting confidence or an updating of your model for checking the quality of reasons.
Because I can definitely understand how you could get a lot of people to be persuaded to vote in the direction you want to vote on whatever issue it is. Like there are charismatic people that will stand up and they are just very charming and friendly and they've got good enough arguments, and they can win the crowd, and like this has been a thing since ancient Greece. The Sophists were professional orators. The Sophists were people that would come and argue your case, that were very good at persuading the crowd and getting people behind you and making very clever intellectual arguments. And they were basically hired to come and argue for whatever side. And they were like the early lawyers, essentially. And they would be hired to come and plead your case, because they were very good at persuading the crowd. And the people were very suspicious of them. They didn't like them because, well, if you have that power to persuade people to do things like that, then you might persuade me of doing something I don't want to do. And actually then the question really becomes, well, look, if people can be persuaded to move you on either side of this argument, how can we determine what's true? And like, really, isn't it that's what's important, is like what's true, not what's persuasive. So I think, learning to be more persuasive and learning to carry the crowd might be effective in some ways, but I just can't believe it has that long-term efficacy that genuinely having a one-to-one conversation will have.
Okay, so any prescriptions for what people should do or not do? That is specific.
Yeah. Well, I think the strongest side of soft SE is, which is, the less bias you're exposing, the better the SE is. Like your kind of gold star idea is like, is kind of it. But I guess like, I guess the core principles that we know. I mean, it's not like, I think in coining this unfortunate term soft SE, I'm not really creating something as so much as just giving a particular aspect of it a name, right? And I think the characteristics of soft SE are utterly removing bias, like, which is something that we've been talking about in SE for the longest time now. Like, so it's not new.
So if you were asking your interlocutor at the end of your conversation, do you have any idea where I stand on this claim? And they say, I have no idea. That's a successful marker for doing soft SE.
So I've thought about that, and I'm not entirely sure that I know that would be, because I suspect that in order to invoke, well, there are two things. One is, I think in culture, in today's culture, if you ask questions about something, you're automatically challenging it. We see that there's been a problem in culture, I think, which is people equate questions to challenge or objection. So if you agreed with me, you would just nod sagely. And if you asked me a question about it, even if that was the most neutral, unagendered question of genuine inquiry, it would seem like you doubted me. You weren't accepting it just on the basis of my utterance, and therefore you're asking me a question. So I don't know that we would always be in a position to get it to the point where we could ask our questions so overwhelmingly neutrally that the person wouldn't feel challenged by merely being asked the questions. But I think it's something we should strive to make sure that we make sure our questions are that neutral.
I mean, what's the best test for neutrality?
Neutrality, yeah. I don't know how we test any of this stuff, to be honest with you. I mean, everything has to be self-report because there's no change in the world that you can effectively measure. I think it would be a good indicator if the person said that they weren't sure what you believed. I think being able to challenge somebody whose views you agreed with and find it just as easy as challenging somebody whose views you disagreed with would be a good indicator to you that you're getting better at SE. Because I definitely have seen it in SE practice, and I felt it myself. It's much harder to do that. I think when you agree with a position, it's harder to see the challenges. being able to steelman the opposing view is a good tool to learn, to be able to properly steelman the view. But I don't know how we can measure like those things. I think these are just things that you can notice along your journey of learning to get better at having these kinds of conversations. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, it's the whole analysis aspect of it is going to be an incredibly difficult one. I've thought about it. I mean, there's this underlying hubris of thinking, okay, like for example, if I take my position, I'm not saying this has anything to do with SE. If I speak solely for myself in this moment, if I'm saying, okay, I want people to build better reasons and I can predict how their belief on this issue might change if their reasons improve, it's sort of like saying, okay, well, I have the accurate model for the world and I would like everybody else to get on board. And if you're brave enough to take that stance, you could follow someone over a significantly longer time and see a range of their beliefs on different topics and see if once the one shifted through the process of SE, if they were to use those same change in their reason to apply to other issues, and you start to see, okay, well, maybe they don't believe their quartz crystal can be held up to the moon and charged to give better, do they start shedding these other ideas that we might see as equally unfounded or on equally rocky epistemological terms? So I've thought about this a lot, about how you would think about testing the efficacy, and I think something along those lines would be a really telling in that way to me. If they sort of, they were asked to reflect on this one issue, they reflected on it over time, they put that issue aside, and then you see these other more, if that makes sense what I'm saying there, I think that would be a really good indication that the realigning of these epistemological tools had a larger effect in their life and really did change the way they thought about things.
Yeah, I certainly think that would be a good, if people self-reported reflecting on things different, consciously being aware that they were reflecting on things differently that weren't actually about the conversation that you spoke to them about, but were actually other areas of their life, and using those same thinking tools to reflect on their own views. I think that would be a great indicator that conversation had been very valuable to that person, and therefore I would argue it was effective. I don't know if that would help us identify the neutrality of it, but I definitely think it would be a good indicator that it was an effective conversation. The neutrality thing is a really challenging component of it. One thing I think might be really useful is the use of like things like the SE review sessions, where and that's not always possible, right? Because not every conversation's recorded and filmed, but for those that are, I think the idea that the SE review sessions pick up on the tone of an agenda. I remember there was one of Mark Solomon, by the way, is lovely, and it's so not typical for him. But I remember him having a conversation. I think it was with the gentleman that was acupuncture. I think it was. He owned the Tiger massage parlor thing, and there was just a one question that Mark asked sort of after quite a long conversation, and it had become a little bit circular, and just Mark asked this very, very pointed, direct messaging style question, and it was so counter, but everybody in the room laughed, at this, at the fact that he'd done this. He'd sort of let his guard down a little bit, and he'd slipped up, and he'd sort of delivered this very non-SE like question, and it was funny. But I think that says to me that SE was trying to normalize for the right kinds of characteristics, right? If we were laughing together at the fact that was definitely a mistake that you made, if we can say that, if we can notice that, then I think the community has got the right intuitions. And I think it's about trying to codify those intuitions a little bit and help people learn those codified intuitions. But yeah, cupping, that was it. Thank you, Gigi. It was cupping. That was a fantastic video. Very, very enjoyable. For both the actual film and the review session was very enjoyable. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on neutrality, Reed? Do you have any thoughts on how we might measure it?
Well, depending on the claim, I may not be neutral. like in my own mind, I want people to change their mind about certain things, but I can definitely ask questions neutrally as if I don't have that bias. I think I could be able to do that successfully, and I would still have potentially a secondary goal of persuasion, maybe, and additionally a secondary goal of, if this turns out the way I expect it to turn out, the video might help expose this type of argument as typical of someone who holds this belief, and there's another example of it. And so I can do that all neutrally, and they would have no idea.
Yeah, there was a really good breakdown of this when you spoke to the big guy with the pit vipers on and he was not vaccinated and had the anti-vax position, and after the fact, you reflected on that. You said, "Look, I genuinely want this guy to change his mind. He's at a high risk. It could cost him his life for the position that he holds." But you didn't conduct the conversation in that way. So I think it was like a perfect encapsulation of what you just said there. From my perspective, you conducted the conversation in that very calm, essay way that you do, and just actively listened and asked probing questions. And so, yeah, I think that it's crystallized in that conversation for sure.
Part of that equation, though, for you, though, Reed, though, gosh, it is very hot. Part of that equation, though, is the video, right? It's a win-win for you, because either the conversation remained neutral, or you got some interesting footage of somebody holding a view, and sort of demonstrating how they got there, right? And so it kind of works either way for the content. But if the content wasn't being filmed, actually that neutrality becomes even more tempting to jettison, right? Because walking away with that person still holding a view you disagree with is going to mean that there's one more person in the world with the wrong ideas, right? So the temptation, I think, in an actual conversation that's not for content would always be much stronger, I suspect, to push for the changing of the mind.
Maybe. I had a private conversation with that Christian Doug talked to. I forgot his name, actually. But we had a recorded conversation on Zoom, but I don't plan to do anything with it. But he knew I was an atheist, and I knew he was a Christian. And I think I'd still asked same questions I would ask if they had no idea what position I had. I don't know. Depends, I guess.
And this other interesting part about this whole neutrality thing is that you know your position and you know their position, and you're perceiving, and even the audience member might think, okay, well, this review they have seems ridiculous. The person asking the questions can't possibly believe it. So in asking the probing questions, you appear to not be neutral. But my question is, could you discern, like, how would the questions change if you were asking somebody questions about a view which you agreed with? If you were still conducting SE on that claim that you agreed with, the questions shouldn't be the same. So there's almost this injection of our own personal feelings in the analysis of neutrality. So I think if you stick to the methods and good faith questions and active listening, I think the lack of neutrality might be an incorrect perception.
Yeah, I just double down on collaboration, that type of vibe. Use more we type language, and how can we, work on this together? If my bias is exposed, then I just try to frame it as more of a collaboration.
Yeah, I think that's important, but I also think it's important to stick to the structure. I think if you stick to the structure of SE, the conversational SE method, then I think you won't go too far wrong. But and I think that's one of the advantages of having like the conversational method be documented, right? Because it is a road. I mean, it's kind of remarkable sometimes how just even the opening questions, the kind of questions you've asked 1,000 times before, and sometimes those can just suddenly, just asking somebody for their definitions of the terms, and then all of a sudden they're like, "Oh God damn, this is gonna. Oh, I didn't realize this was gonna be hard. You want to know what my words mean? Oh my God, and it's kind of delightful, but it kind of. I think bad. Mark Solomon's quite good. I keep mentioning his name. Actually, ironically, he was going to join us today, but he couldn't make it because of the timing. But Mark is really good at going through the motions. Like he goes through the questions very methodically, and he's asking these questions for the 1,000th time, and it always amazes me just sort of exactly when the conversation suddenly becomes slightly unraveled for the person he's talking to, because it's actually kind of hard to predict. Sometimes they don't seem to become unraveled. They just become a little frayed and frustrated towards the end, but sometimes they become unraveled immediately. But he's very methodical in the way he approaches his interviews, and I think it's really interesting to notice that you can't predict what question is going to really cause somebody that sort of moment of reflection and sudden like panic almost. Why do I think this? So yeah, I think having a structure to the conversation and having a method is hugely advantageous in this space. And I think the more you're tempted to wander off the script, as it were, not that it is a script. I mean, I guess that's another problem, is like what is that method? What is the conversational approach? Like, I mean, there's the high level, like what, why, and how hierarchy of questions. But there isn't really a script per se, and it. I mean, in your attempts to help try to codify this for the course, has this been something you've struggled with?
We have narrowed it down to I think 7 or 8 steps now, but that is like the usual structure. But within those steps, it's not really scripted. There's just tons of ways you can go.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. So I think it's definitely it's more about intentions and having that structure to work with. I think that makes it a neutral conversation. I think if you feel your intentions shifting towards persuasion, and you feel you're deliberately moving away from the kind of the structure of the foundation of the scaffolding, if you like, of the SE framework, conversational framework, then I think you could be fairly sure that you're probably making mistakes in that moment. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting. I'm still interested. I was interested to see how many people recognized what I meant by hard and soft SE as well. Like it wasn't. It sort of came up in conversation quite a bit afterwards, and I saw you guys talking about it, and I know that the strict definition wasn't clear, but I think most people sort of got a sense of what was meant by that.
You maybe like outcome focused or outcome independent or ambivalent.
Yeah, I don't think it's outcome ambivalent. It's just the nature of the outcome. Like I really do want you to reflect on what you think, right? And that's an objective I have, and I have a bias as well. I'm biased towards you applying rational critical thinking, and sticking to a rational view. I want you to use rational tools to explain and to get to where you're going. And so I have that bias, and I also have that objective. I really want you to think about what you think, but I don't have an objective about where you end up. I just want you to do that work. Maybe it's like, I want you to exercise and become fitter, but I don't care what sports you play afterwards, right? But I just want you to be physically fitter, so that whatever sports you choose to play, you'll be better at them. So yeah, it's kind of more fundamental to me, and so I think there is an objective, and I think we can pursue that objective quite aggressively, and I think we do have a bias, and we can be honest about that bias. But I think the moment your objective is different, becomes about where they end up. I think that's definitely started to become hard SE, and that's why Peter definitely had a view when he was talking to.
Yeah. Did you see my recent video on Peter's channel about abortion?
I didn't know. When was that up?
That was yesterday, I think.
I missed it.
Maybe we'll do a review show about that. We'll see how that goes.
Oh, awesome. Was it better?
I think so.
Was this you doing SE?
I did.
Peter?
I did like that Spectrum format.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Huh. What was that like?
It was good.
Was it? Did you feel that when you were doing that, did you feel it was SE?
Yeah.
Ah, interesting. How many people did you have on the spectrum thing?
2, and they had the same view pretty much.
Okay.
I would like to try it with people on different lines.
What is the value of the spectrum thing here? What does it do for you?
It's a visual confidence scale.
Yeah. So is it just a tool for doing SE with more people at once?
Yeah, and to visualize where people are, and if they change their mind mid-conversation, they move physically, and that's cool to see.
So this certainly makes sense from a video and a filming perspective, right? You've got this sort of visual component to it, but in terms of doing SE with more than one person, which is another topic we touched on last week, what are your views here? Do you feel like SE is meaningfully achievable with multiple people simultaneously?
Maybe not as achievable because you got to split your focus on people, but the people I talked to had a good time and they did reflect, and it seemed like a fun time.
If you just spent that same amount of time with them individually, do you think they would have had a more? If you just split the amount of time you spent between the two of them and just gave them an individual session, do you think they would have been able to have a more interesting reflection, or do you think it would have been just as effective?
I don't know. And after reading How Minds Change, he talks about how like arguing really is a group thing that we should be doing. That's how we evolved to use it. Like you come together as a group to argue it out. And it's like less pressure because you can just throw out reasons, good or bad. And you can expect people to, if you're on the same team trying to work out a problem, you can, talk about reasons. So if they're on the same line, they can throw out reasons and work together to come up with a good case for their line. And so it's like maybe not as, if you are going to have someone else on another side, it's like less pressure if you're on a team. But their whole, and I would like to frame it as like the whole line. If someone is anywhere on the line, they're all on a team working together, figure out what is the best line to be at. But then you have like a mini team if you're on the same line with someone else. So it is interesting.
There's all kinds of group thinking behaviors, though, right, that come into play there. Like, how about you, Joe? Do you feel like group SE is achievable, like multiple people? Do you feel like my intuition is that it's not as good, but I don't have a lot of justification for that.
I feel like you can definitely still inspire reflection, but it might be a more difficult road to have a. Well, see, I was going to say it might be a more difficult road to have a purely honest response to your questions, because they'll be thinking of the pressure of if someone moves to a space on the line first, then they're now doing that in direct contention to that. So Are they going to want to avoid conflict and offer the same confidence, or do they stand alone? So, and of course that's down to the person but then social anxiety in a one-on-one conversation might lead them not to give accurate responses either. So that's an incredibly complex thing. But yeah, I think a group dynamic is, in my mind, more likely. But yeah, that could be changed with setting and energy and all sorts of stuff. So it's interesting. Yeah.
Banana Warrior Princess, how you doing? Nice to see you. The book is How Minds Change by, what's the gentleman's name again? I keep forgetting it. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Oh, no, it hasn't got the guy's name. What's the author's name?
David McRaney.
Ah, McRaney, that's it. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. I actually have that book, and I did skip to the street epistemology section. And then I just felt, why am I reading one of Anthony's videos?
Yeah. I've seen this before.
This makes some sense. Yeah, so the group SE thing. I think there are definitely group behaviors. One of the things that I think is quite interesting about SE is this idea that you are one of the reasons why I think SE can actually be weirdly effective or unexpectedly effective with people is that you are, right, especially when you're talking to a stranger and you have that disposable moment together, and there's just something about this idea that you don't really care what the person this person who's asking you the questions, right? They're never going to be involved in your life ever again, right? This isn't the case for all SE conversations, right? But there is something special when that is the case, I think, because you can be completely honest with a stranger. You don't have to care about what they think about you. You don't have to maintain a pre-existing narrative of who you are in their eyes. You don't have to worry about the social impact of what they might think, or who they might tell. You can be really, really honest with that person, and I think that's really important, or a really valuable thing. And I suspect that gets eroded, very quickly once you start doing it with other people around, that they know. And these people in the university campus standing on these lines, they're in the same spaces, right? And they might know each other, or they might know of people who know each other, and they might be more inclined to want to normalize their views as well as represent them. So being encouraged to stand on the same line, for example, rather than. And I just wonder whether SE can be as effective in that space.
Yeah. Bogosian's video on abortion at Dartmouth, like the people on the strongly agree side, there are three of them, two guys, one girl, and you could tell the guys were kind of trying to appeal to the girl with their reasons. This is very obvious.
Yeah, it's difficult, right? The more things like that are at play, I think the less easy it would be to be open. I think that group dynamic has perhaps slightly different goals, and each other has a different effect. Did I read that incorrectly? I think the group dynamic has perhaps
each tool has a different effect.
And each tool has a different effect. Yeah. And it's. I think for a video, I think for what I suspect Peter was attempting to do here, like I think the setup of the scale, the visual component of the scale makes sense. Although that wasn't there from the beginning, was it? It was something that was introduced midway through the tour, or early on-ish in the tour. But I think that makes sense. But I think the thing that makes less sense to me is having the conversation with more than one person. I think that probably was the thing that harmed every aspect of it in a very subtle way. Because one of the things is that I think Peter was trying now to maintain a conversation with three people. At one point, I was the gender one. The one I remember particularly. He was maintaining this conversation with three people, and they're at different ends of the spectrum. And I just think cognitively it's quite difficult to do that, right? Because you're trying to explore people's views, but he seemed to really be able to do was just ask what they thought to the other person, what the other person had said. I mean, all he was really doing was. And I think it would have been very difficult to have that real kind of let's walk this through in stages kind of approach that SE takes. Let's kind of break this down and step through this with three people simultaneously expressing opposing views and ideas. And I don't think it really helped him being able to say, well, that person doesn't agree with you. What do you think to what he just said? I don't think it really brought that structure that SE needs to have to sort of build up a sort of view of why you think what you think.
It's like sending a message by proxy using the person there. Exactly. You don't want to do that.
Yes, and that's when he wasn't sending messages just himself.
Yeah.
Did the I meant to ask you this in any case, but did he take a look at the video? Has he commented on it? Because I know he hasn't said anything sort of on the YouTube channel. Did he think about it? Any of the things we said in that review that we did?
He has mentioned that like most people find it to be a really good video, good series, and very positive about it. But like us SEers are like many of us are super negative about it, and that was a little surprising to him.
Right.
But he's going to be doing a comment review video. So if you have any other comments, feel free to make comments on the videos, and we'll point them out, and he can react to those.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting because again, it very much depends on what this thing is, right? If it's SE, then it's not what we consider currently to be SE, I think, or at least not a great example of what we currently consider to be SE.
Not the gold star soft SE for sure.
Certainly not Gold Star Soft SE, although that's or Jedi SE as we're now going to refer to it. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to think a bit more about this, but I think it's a really good thing to think about. Like, why not just like what's the difference between the hard and the soft approaches, but why do we think the soft approach is worth going for? Like, why has it softened over time? You know, and I genuinely think that it's largely softened over time because, you know, Anthony's softened over time. Anthony's softened his approach over time. Like that's what he was demonstrating in that video we saw earlier. Like he starts out just screaming at the guy, and then he starts to apply methods, and he starts to encourage other people to reflect on it. And he even looks back at videos like 4 or 5 years ago and is cringing. You know, 3 years ago, slightly less cringing. You know, and it's clearly getting better. Something's changing in it. And I think its softening is part of what's changing. The less agendaed he was, the better he felt like the conversation went. And yeah, and I think your videos are just a masterclass in sort of poker face, if you pardon the pun, the poker face approach, and just the subtle question. This is the quiet, unassuming question. None of your questions feel aggressive or pointed. You don't tend to get the impression of an agenda. And I know you and I have had a conversation about whether or not SE should be seeking to persuade or not. Like that's a lively conversation. But that never comes across in your videos.
Yeah, I mean, I could have agenda. I might not. You could never tell because I try to have that poker face.
And I think it's important. I think it's important. Yeah. Do you feel like that's a way of disarming your interlocutor, or as in, because this is the suspicion I think from the critics, right? Is that this is just how we pretend we're being open and honest and friendly, but actually we're sneaking in our views, like we're smuggling them in. So do you feel like this is you wearing a suit and tie to a job interview and hoping they don't realize that you're the slob that you clearly are, right? Do you think that this is this performative? And so we give the facade of openness and agenda, not being agendaed, but actually we're doing this because it's much more effective than when we sneak in our messages.
I may put it on a little bit, but it's really just me. It's my personality.
Right. I think so too. Yeah, I think it's Would you prefer to be a sort of Pine Creek? If you could choose between being Cordial Curiosity and being Pine Creek, which would you prefer?
I'd like to be able to have that capacity for sure. Yeah.
How about you, Joe? Would you prefer to be a Cordial Curiosity or a Pine Creek?
I don't have the personality for Pine Creek. There's Doug has the sort of cheeky charm, charisma to pull off his tongue-in-cheek jibes, you know. That takes a certain person. I'm much more of the person who's just really genuinely interested in people, and so the Cordial Curiosity side of things, or maybe even more like the Anthony style of things suits me more, because I will genuinely just be interested to speak to this person and want to, yeah. And I'm also not agendaed in combating religion in the way that that Doug is. So yeah, I mean, it would be hilariously fun to do what Doug does, but yeah, I'm not the person for that.
I want to talk to Doug about this because, like, I really would like to have a conversation with him about how he got to where he was, because I think that and how he reflects on it and soft SE. Like, I would be interested in what his view of soft SE is, and whether he thought there was value in it or not.
I think in the context of what Doug does, if he has a channel with all of this content in the backlog, people know where he's coming from eventually. So if he did attempt to do soft SE with all of that out there, like, it would be very disingenuous.
Oh no, I'm not proposing that he would change, and that would definitely look like a wolf poorly dressed in sheep's clothing, no doubt. But I think it's more just, I guess I wonder how he would see like the efficacy of soft SE. Like, is there would he see any value in soft SE, for example, being as successful as he's been doing what he's doing? You know, like does he think that that's more effective, and maybe that this is the thing that we should be working towards?
I think he does see it as effective, but he's just not that patient for what he wants to do.
That's cool. Yeah, which it would be good to reach out to him and see if he wants to join us one day, because it would be. I would. Yeah, I think he's an interesting person to talk to on this, and his name definitely always comes up when we talk about hard SE. But I think I would say that on the scale of, you know, Peter Boghossian is way further than Doug. I mean, Doug is not. You know, he's sort of. He's not even Darth Vader to to Boghossian's Palpatine here. But yeah.
But it's also, again, subjective to the audience, right? So he's crafted an audience. It's very clear what audience he has. He has very strongly religious-minded people that are consuming apologetics all the time. He's not randomly bumping into strangers on the street, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So that context changes drastically as well. It wouldn't make sense for him, I don't think. But yeah, he's found a niche, and he's still, you know, he's very tongue-in-cheek and all the rest of it, but he still asks poignant questions and is very. I like his style a lot. I think there are a very large sector of people for which that will be highly effective for, you know. So.
No, you're right, and this is I think this is the thing. It's like, I don't think SE should aspire to be adopting those approaches, but it doesn't mean I don't think those approaches aren't, you know, brilliant, and there isn't an audience and value in them, and that's a real. I think that's something that people maybe don't, when we're criticizing in the SE review videos, when we're criticizing something for being, you know, delivering messages or pushing an agenda or being, you know, it's funny in a weird way. You've got the sort of, some of the SE critics are saying, you know, you're pushing your agenda, you're just forcing your narratives, you know, blah blah blah, and then the other side of the fence, they're criticizing us for criticizing the fact that people might be mentioning an agenda or pushing a bias or something like that. And it's like, well, you know, but so when we're doing this, I don't think in any case, I don't think anybody's saying that doesn't mean it's not inherently a bad thing. It's just you stop doing SE, right? Like, if you want to pick up the football and run with it and throw it into the goal, then by all means invent rugby or American football. You know, by all means do that and make that game. And I'm sure that game's going to be great, right? But don't call it football, ironically. That was the worst analogy I could have possibly chosen, because you guys do call it football. But anyway, but do you know what I mean? Like, that's no longer soccer for our American audience. That's no longer soccer, right? Just it's a perfectly valid game in its own right. But, you know, if we're judging about whether or not you're doing you're playing soccer well, the moment you pick up the ball and run with it, we could say you're not a very good soccer player, right? That's a perfectly valid criticism, even if American football is still a valid sport in its own right.
If civil, sincere, and collaborative is the criteria we have in the module, I think Doug is civil and sincere, but he's not so much collaborative. It's more of a competitive way of applying the questions.
Yes, I would agree with that.
So that would be the disqualification potentially for me.
I also think the locus of the conversation is important. Like, his focus is, I think he focuses on the audience. Like, I think this is performative to a point. It's not there are people that are more performative. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not saying he's only doing this for the sake of the shock factor. Right? There are worse out there in that space, but I think the audience is a factor for him.
Yeah, his primary goal is not for his interlocutor to reflect. It's for him to be entertained and for the audience to be entertained. And maybe third is helping them reflect. Or maybe third is helping them change their mind, and fourth is merely reflection. So
something like that.
But to be fair to Doug, nested in that though is very close attention to the person that he's talking to. He's hearing what they're saying, and he's So to be not to totally dismiss, you know, someone.
Yeah, I would wonder what
still
his
engaging
priority
with
is.
talking to.
Yeah, but I think the moment that the conversation became bad content, even if it was being an effective conversation, I wonder if he. Well, I don't know. I don't know. I think it'd be good to ask him. Maybe find out whether he felt that where his priorities were.
Well, he's
in
the
those
master of cutting out of a conversation, right? If he
Yeah.
pins them into a corner and they just say the most nonsensical apologetic blurb, he just goes, "Okay, goodbye," and hangs up. I mean, that's great. Don't waste your time on people who don't want to.
And he can't believe that that's going to encourage them to reflect, though. But then again,
But
that
that's
audience,
the point. It's
that
valid
audience-
and it reflects. Yeah. Well, sorry, go on.
No, that audience though is working both ways though, because there's only like if you're having a one-to-one conversation with somebody, right? They can give you the kind of smokescreen jibber jabber nonsense, right? The kind of like rah rah rah. It's because of reasons. They can do all of that, but they're just wasting oxygen in the room. If you're clearly just not like responding to that sort of way of engaging, it's just wasting oxygen in the room, and eventually they're going to have to stop and either choose to walk away from you or interact with you, right? But if there's an audience, then actually they're on the show, they're motivated to continue to do the jibber jabber stuff because ultimately they're preaching to the audience as well as you know. So I think partly on Doug's show that there is a dual dynamic of appealing to the audience, right? It's not like a conversation necessarily between just these two people. It's like they're both performing in front of the audience.
Yeah.
I do this thing. It's driving me nuts. I have this really, I don't know what the fuck is wrong with me, but like I basically will just repeat the same thing multiple times, like because I don't feel like I've said it clearly enough, and I realize I've just said it at the same time 3 times. I keep doing it, and it's driving me crazy. And I think it's because I'm just not comfortable with pausing, like at the end of my sentence, and just stopping. And then letting other people think, and so I keep trying to fill the air.
Anthony.
Say again. Embrace my inner Anthony.
Embrace your Anthony. Yeah.
I should do that. Well, I need to work on that for sure. Guys, it is super hot. I need to go and take some painkillers and lie down because my head is throbbing. It has been hay fever. I swear to God, all plants need to die. High confidence. It's just the way it is. This has been a really good conversation. I've really liked it. By the way, the best comment for today. Loved it. Fantastic. You're absolutely right. Travis, you're the best, buddy. Thank you so much. I'm really enjoying the Star Wars metaphor, so I'm going to definitely get my Photoshop out and we'll do the full. We'll put everybody on the spectrum. That should be fun. But yeah, Reed, anything you want to shout out? Any new videos you've got coming up that you want to call out, or anything exciting happening?
Yeah, I just did a video on Peter Boghossian's channel. Check that out, the abortion one. We might do a review show on that. Besides that, once I get back to LA, I think I will go back to UCLA and do some more SD conversation. So stay tuned.
Awesome. How about you, Jay? Any thoughts on how's the upcoming channel project coming?
Yeah, my life's a little bit difficult at the moment to get anything off the ground. I'm traveling back and forth from 2 different locations constantly for work, so not the most fruitful thing. But interestingly, I'm working next to a very, let's say, spiritual part of British Columbia, so there could be some real utility in SE conversations there. But I'm not sure how well it would go down in that community. It's almost ubiquitous, the whole very spiritual, crystal healing kind of vibe. So maybe I should try it out and see if they're open to conversations.
could end up in an interesting story either way. But yeah, that sounds cool, man. I think there's a lot of value in having these SE conversations, even if there's no cameras rolling, for sure. So yeah, I would definitely looking forward to hearing about how that goes. Whether you get thrown off the island.
Yeah. And just a shout out to the participation from everybody in chat. It's obviously been awesome. Lots of good comments and yeah,
absolutely
lots of paying attention for the whole thing. So it's fantastic.
Yeah, thank you everybody. You guys have been great. It's been a really good conversation. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody. See, I repeated the so there. Yeah, I don't know. I have a headache. That's going to be my excuse. I'm going to stick with this. Hay fever, the heat, it's just the worst. But thank you, everybody. Thanks for the great conversation, Joe, Reed. Brilliant chat. Check out next week. We should be back for another... I don't know what I'm calling the show. Inspire Reflection Live. That's it. But until then, next week, guys, stay safe, look after yourselves, enjoy your Friday, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Take care.